Hi, and welcome to Beyond the Barracks, the podcast where service ends but the story begins. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have the legend that is Mark Ormrod on the show.
Here I am.
Here he is in the flesh. It's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. Really great to speak to you.
My pleasure. I like that little intro. I'm going to forget what you just said already, even though I said I liked it.
You have
What
to
was
listen
the,
to
what
it,
was
man.
the thing about? What did you,
Where where your service ends but the story begins.
I love that. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
all. I might steal
No.
that.
Let me publish it first.
Okay. All right.
Right, so it's all about you today, obviously, because that's what people have come to listen to. So take me back to the beginning. What inspires you to join the Royal Marines?
So I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s. Back when we had, and you remember this, VHS cassettes.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
were no smartphones. The internet didn't exist. It was archaic. It was crazy. I growing up was a big fan of the 80s, 90s action movie stars. Your Stallones, your Schwarzeneggers, and all these guys. And I also was quite lucky in that when I was growing up, all of my friends were slightly older than I was, 2 or 3 years older. So they were slightly farther ahead in life than I was. And when I got to about 15 years old, and I mean, even though I knew this and I've been told this by teachers and everything, you don't listen when you're 15. And I just had this epiphany one day that actually, in less than a year, I was going to have to make a decision about what I was going to do in my life because my back then, what were GCSEs were on the horizon, and I had to decide whether I wanted to pursue college and maybe university, or whether I wanted to go into the big bad world and start a life out there. And it's funny because even when I was going through that period, I'm not very academic. I enjoy learning things that I enjoy learning about, but when you're kind of quote unquote forced to learn certain things in school, it's a bit of a slog. So I wasn't particularly academic, and naturally my instinct didn't gravitate towards college or university. But I also knew that when I went into the big bad world, I wanted a career rather than a job. I wanted something where I could go in at the bottom, learn skills, work my way up, achieve things, grow, become a better person. I didn't know what that looked like at the time, but when I sat and thought about it, I just knew that's what excited me, the personal growth, if you like, of life. And I think being an action movie fan and watching Arnie and all these guys, Stallone playing Rambo and all this, I used to look at these guys and think, that's kind of what I want to be like. I want to be this guy, the big, fit, strong guy who can take out the baddies, but always the gentleman that saves the day and pulls out the chair for the lady and looks after the little guys. And then I kind of looked at my mates who were older than me, and they had all left school at this point. And I had a friend in the army, friend in the navy. I had some that were attempting the Royal Marines, although I didn't really know who they were at that point. And then I'll even admit it publicly. I had a friend in the RAF. I don't tell many people that story because it's embarrassing. No, I'm just kidding. But I looked at these guys and these girls, and based on it sounds a bit silly, but based on these movies that I was obsessed with and what they were doing, it just felt like a natural fit to me. And so I decided that that's the kind of route I wanted to go down. No matter what happened with these GCSEs, whether I aced them or failed them, I had kind of made a decision at that point that a life in the military was what I wanted to pursue. Now, initially, I applied to, well, I got the paperwork to apply to join the army because one of my good friends was in the tank regiment in Germany. And he was one of the ones that was coming home on leave periods. And to me, he always seemed to have money. He'd have a new car all the time. He would always tell these stories about the guns that he got to play with and the tanks he got to drive and the fitness tests that they did and all this cool stuff. And I used to be like extremely intrigued and wanted to learn more. And so he actually took me down to the career center when I was about 15 and a half. And we spoke to the army recruiter and I got the paperwork and I took it home. And because of my age, my parents had to sign it to give me permission to start the recruitment process. And then my dad actually told me that I had an uncle who was a retired Royal Marine. And I knew he'd been in the military, but I just didn't know much about it and what his service was. So we arranged to go and meet him that same week on the Saturday. And I live down here in Plymouth. Royal Marines recruit training is in Exmouth, about 45 minutes away, and he lived kind of halfway between the two. So it wasn't that far. We jumped in the car, went to his house, and he had joined the Royal Marines as a Marine, so our equivalent of a private. He had served a full career of 22 years, and then he had left as a captain. So he had a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and he sat me down and he talked me through his career, and he told me about the things that he had done and experienced, the places he'd traveled, the things he'd been involved in. He explained to me about how difficult the training was, and how the failure rate was huge, and that if I wanted to do it, I had to be completely and utterly focused and dedicated to this. And then he sent me on my way, and I went back home. And this was about 1999 when the internet was creeping in. We had that dial-up where you used to plug into the landline and you go and it'd screech. And then if someone picked the phone up, it cut you off. But we had a household computer. We were quite lucky. And so I got to do a little bit of research on my own into who the Royal Marines were and the history and the current affairs and all that kind of stuff. But I also went back to the recruiting office, spoke to the Royal Marine recruiter, and he put the VHS recruiting video in. And I just remember watching it thinking, holy shit, like, how did I not know who these people were? Especially living in Plymouth where their headquarters are, 4-2 Commando is. I guess maybe just my age, I didn't really know who they were, but I watched this video and I thought, damn, I want to see if I can do this. These seem to be the ultimate, if you want to put it in Hollywood terms, they were like Rambo or Commando. They could do anything, go anywhere at the drop of a hat in any environment, any conditions, by any means, air, sea, land. And I was like, wow, I wonder if I could do this and be capable of this. So I got the paperwork, took it home, got it signed, sent it back, went back to school, did my exams, did pretty well. Back then you could only do 10. And I got 9 A to C's and 1 D. I don't know what that is the equivalent of now. I think 9's the highest you can get now. So they were like a bunch of 7.
Yeah, probably like treble A stars in today's equivalent.
I don't know. I surprised myself, if I'm honest, because I was a bit of a clown in school, and a bit in my reports they used to call me cheeky, which meant disruptive and just didn't concentrate. And I kind of surprised myself. I got a D in geography, and so that was the only below average I got. So I could have went to college, but I was just, I was locked in. I just couldn't get this image out of my mind of these blokes assaulting beaches and fast roping at helicopters and skiing with giant packs on. So I did my exams. I'd already sent the paperwork off, waited for the letter to come. The letter eventually came, again via snail mail, because no one really had email back then, inviting me for a 3-day potential Royal Marine course. I went to Lympstone, was lucky enough not to get injured doing that 3 days, passed it, went home with a kit list and a fitness program, and got told, get this kit, stick to this training program, don't do any more, don't do any less. It's designed to be progressive, and just wait. You're going to get another letter at some point, which will give you a start date for recruit training. So between now and then, all you have to do is what it says in this bit of paper, and then come along at the date we give you and see if you can do it. See if you've got what it takes to pass Royal Marines recruit training, which is what I did.
Yeah. I find it amazing how you didn't know I think in those days people didn't really show off, or there wasn't as much information, and I didn't know that your uncle had done 22 years in the Royal Marines till you'd mentioned it kind of to your dad.
Well, do you want to know another funny story, slightly off topic? And I thought we'll get back on topic. But when my granddad died in 2015, and my nan was clearing a house out, she invited me round, and she said, "Oh, I've got something that you might be interested in." So I went round there, opened it up, and it was a bunch of these tatty medals. And I'm like, "Whose are these?" And she went, "Oh yeah, my dad was a Royal Marine and he served in the Second World War, and your granddad's dad was in the Royal Navy and he was in the First World War." And I'm like, "Do you not think you could have told me this like when, when I was joining the Royal Marines?" Because I went through my entire career of people saying, "Are you from a military family?" And I'm like, "No, not really.
Yeah.
I've got an uncle and that was it." And I had this whole, tree of people that had served in the military that
Yeah,
I
so
didn't know.
it was in your blood, you just didn't know it.
No, I didn't. I had no
You
clue.
were destined to be a Royal Marine, no
Apparently
matter
so.
what.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, that is
yeah. It was
interesting.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so what going forward on you passed basic, you deployed to a unit. So what are your most defining moments before? I know you left briefly in 2006, but before you had your injury, what were your most memorable moments? I think I'm trying to say.
I don't really think I can talk about the most memorable ones. They all involve alcohol and dressing as a woman, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I'm in a weird way. This might sound weird to some people. I was very fortunate in the way that within the first 5 years of my career, I managed to fit quite a lot in. So I finished my training 4 weeks after 9/11 happened. Went straight into a pre-deployment training cycle. I deployed to Iraq when I was 19 on Operation Telet 1 in 2003. I had done a couple of tours in Norway, learning to fight and operate and survive out in the Arctic. I'd been on two ships. I'd sailed. One of those sailed to Norway, one sailed to America, to a big joint exercise with Allied forces down in Virginia on exercise Aurora. I had boxed as a heavyweight for the Royal Marines. I had done all these courses, qualifications, got all my driving license. I squeezed a lot in. So it's hard to really pick out one defining moment. But I think, as anyone would agree with, getting that green lid placed on your head is an unbelievably defining moment in your life. And then I think going to war at 19 was quite an eye opener. So those two were probably the main things that I managed to do in those first 5 years. Mm.
Yeah, I think because we joined similar sort of time. I joined 96, 97. And when I joined, there was like nothing happening but Bosnia, and then obviously 9/11 happened, and then the world erupted in for us because people wonder sometimes why you join the military, don't they? And the reason why you join the military is essentially to go on operations and go to war. And those gongs that you saw your granddads and Second World and First World War, isn't it? And nothing has happened really since um, the Falklands, and then Bosnia happened, which was a dragged out operation, and then it all opened up, didn't it? In that respect, and the world got a bit crazy.
It got very crazy, yeah, very quickly. And for the next 20 years, this constant cycle of deployments between Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq for me actually was, quite uneventful, which I found a little bit confusing as a
Mm.
Royal Marine because all that research that I'd done, all the video I just mentioned that I'd seen, all the while going through recruit training when your training team are telling you, how great you are and blowing smoke up your ass and telling you, and you learn about the history of Royal Marines and you understand that they've done some incredible things. So in my mind, I thought, and this is a bit silly, but I thought I was going to land in Iraq, run out the back of a helicopter into a hail of bullets, and just crawl around with a bayonet in my teeth, taking out bad guys, and with bullets bouncing off me. But the reality was, it was, for me anyway, it was a slow, drawn out 3.5 months. I never fired a single round. Spent a lot of time, and it was pretty scary, in a chemical suit with a respirator on in the middle of the desert, hoping that my lungs weren't going to boil and my skin going to melt off. But yeah, I came back like, okay, that was it. Like, that's war, is it? It wasn't what I'd seen in those movies that I'd watched growing up, or anything that I thought a war was, or I'd learned in school or anything. But then we switched focus. We switched focus later on. As you said earlier, I left for a year, rejoined, came back in, and then went straight into a pre-deployment training cycle to go to Afghanistan, this time on Operation Herrick 7. And I kind of knew, even just from the training that we were doing, that it was going to be different. It just felt different, and I knew it was going to be a different experience. And that's exactly what it turned out to be. Very much what I thought going to war was. More firefights, more bullets, more bombs. Unfortunately, a lot more chaos and death and injury. But yeah, and that cycle continued, not for me personally, but for many men and women for 2 decades, of craziness and tragedy.
Yeah. There was a lot of, was it 467 people lost their lives, I think?
And do you know what's tragic? I
conflict?
saw a statistic the other day saying that more people have taken their own lives since those conflicts than were killed in conflict.
Yeah.
And, as one of them, Craig, 4 or 5 weeks ago now, was the latest of my circle of friends that's done that. So the legacy, it doesn't just stop the day you fall out. The legacy continues for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. So for you, obviously, it came to a horrendous end, your career. Are you okay talking about? I know I've heard you talk about it in the past, but different days you can feel different. Are you okay talking about what happened to you in Afghan?
Yeah, for sure.
Talk us through it.
Yeah, so like I said, when I rejoined, I went straight into a pre-deployment training cycle. Deployed on the 7th of September 2007. Spent a couple of days in Camp Bastion, which most people probably heard of. Just acclimatizing, prepping kit and equipment, running training serials, that kind of thing. And then was put on the back of a Chinook, flown out to Helmand province, and was to spend the next 6 months working out of a place called Forward Operating Base Robinson. And our job back then, our responsibilities were very, very similar to what everyone had done before us, and I imagine what everyone did after us, which was basic infantry style soldiering. So going out, conducting foot patrols, engaging with the locals, trying to win hearts and minds, providing them with security and food and water and those kind of things, and taking the fight to the enemy, trying to dominate the ground and proactively push them out of those areas and provide some stability and hopefully some peace. So most of what we did involved foot patrolling and conducting missions and operations on various different things. And then on Christmas Eve, 2007, me and a group of the lads were called up to the headquarters compound. We were given a brief on what was to be our next routine patrol. We went back to our compound, started prepping all of our kit and equipment like we had done 1,000 times before. We went back up to the HQ compound, formed up by the rear entrance of camp, and got ready to leave. Now, this patrol, the idea of it was very, very basic. We were told to leave the rear entrance of camp in 2 sections, with 8 men in each section. One go north, one go south. We were told to patrol the immediate perimeter of camp, pushing no more than 300 meters from the perimeter wall. And then we were both to meet at the front entrance of camp. So now the opposite side of camp, where we were to secure a location and finish up for the day. So in terms of what we had done to that point, this was very, very basic, low-level infantry-style soldiering. And we hadn't received any extra intelligence from any of our sources to give us any immediate cause for concern. So the time came, we were given the green light. They opened the rear entrance to camp. We left. I was second in command of the group that went north. The other guys went south. And we went out and we did what we were tasked to do. About 5 hours into it, both groups of men then found themselves at the other side of camp. So now we're at the front entrance, ready to finish up for the day and go back in. And the section that I was in were on this piece of high ground, what we called the North Fort. It was one of our target indicators if we ever came into contact with the enemy. Beneath us slightly was Forward Operating Base Robinson that we were operating out of. And then beneath that was that other group of men that we had left with earlier in the day. So obviously, tactically, we're in a very advantageous position because we can see everything around us, and it's obviously easier to fight in a firefight going down a hill than it is up. So our responsibilities in that situation was to provide overwatch for that other group of men. The guy in charge, Corporal Sean Helsby, started taking his half of the section and giving them fire positions. And then I took my half of the section. And because we were on high ground and effectively on this ridge line, we didn't have any of the luxuries that we normally would have had for options for taking cover. We didn't have any buildings, any walls, any rocks, or anything like that. But about 4 meters to my front, there was a shallow bowl in the ground. And I thought to myself, okay, if we get in there, get on our bellies, because we're on high ground, anybody looking up at us is going to have a really difficult time to see us, which means they're going to have a really difficult time trying to engage us with rockets, mortars, AKs, whatever it was. So in my mind, in that situation, in the environment that we're operating in, that was the best form of protection that I could give to those guys. So they jumped in. They all started taking their fire positions. I stood back. A couple of observations I had to make, a couple of checks I had to undertake. And then when they were happy and I was happy, I started walking over towards a position that I had selected for myself. And as I went to get down on my stomach, I put my right knee on the floor. And that was the moment that I knelt on and detonated an improvised explosive device.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do remember.
Did you remember anything from it? Did you the classic on the TV where you hear a click and you think, oh shit, or was it just?
No, it's not like that. I mean, there are hundreds of different kinds of IEDs, right?
Yeah.
So well, there is one like that somewhere. But for me, it wasn't. I knelt down. Next thing I know, there's a huge explosion. Huge dust cloud was created. I was in no pain. Didn't know what I had done. Couldn't see anything, so I couldn't figure out what was going on. But my instinct told me that we were under attack. I thought someone had taken a pot shot with a rocket or a mortar that had exploded nearby. So my initial instinct was obviously ID the enemy, neutralize the threat. Now I knew that where we were positioned, about 600 meters behind me, down on the low ground, was a small rectangular forestry block, like a group of trees. And everything else around there was just flat mud fields. So in all that chaos, and it's pretty crazy because I kind of just brush over this, but you got to imagine the adrenaline spike and the panic that my friends had been hurt or killed, the fact I can't see anything because this dust cloud had been created, and just the confusion and the overwhelm of not knowing what's going on, and if we're going to get into this massive firefight now. But I thought, if anyone's going to attack us, it's going to be from that small group of trees that was behind me. So in my mind, with all this going on, I remember saying, turn around, Mark, turn around. ID the enemy, start shooting. When you start shooting, the rest of the lads will start shooting, and then hopefully we can suppress them, make some sort of withdrawal, get to some better ground, and then obviously conduct some sort of attack, fight through the position, outflank them, whatever it is. After about 5 times in my mind of saying, turn around, Mark, turn around, even though I couldn't see anything because of this dust cloud that had been created from the explosion, I knew that my body wasn't doing what my brain was telling it to do, but I didn't know why. And so I did the only thing that I could do in that scenario, which was just to wait. I just thought, okay, I need to wait, let this dust cloud settle, take a look around, observe the situation, figure out what's going on, make some very quick decisions, and then do whatever we can do to get the lads out of there safely. So we got to about chest height, and like I said, I am like overflowing with adrenaline at this point, and chaos and confusion, and just terrified that my friends might have been hurt or killed, but I still couldn't see any of them. I think they had been blasted out of the area after the IED exploded. So I carried on waiting. And then this dust cloud got about 6 inches from the floor and hit the ground and then disappeared. And as it disappeared, I looked down to where my legs should have been. And they had both been just completely torn off from the knees down. Now, it's a pretty surreal experience because, again, like I said, I'm full of adrenaline. Fight or flight's kicked in. Extremely overwhelmed. Terrified that my friends may have been hurt or killed. And then just completely confused, like looking at where my legs should have been, thinking, that's odd. Like that doesn't seem right to me. And I don't think your brain can process it. And then when you add to that the fact that I wasn't in any pain, it all just becomes very confusing and overwhelming. I probably only sat there for about 2 seconds because time gets quite distorted in this kind of scenario. But I remember just like snapping out of it quite quickly, and it for some reason not seeming important to me. And I started looking around again to see if I could see the lads. And I looked over my right shoulder, and as I did, I saw Corporal Helsby. Now, me and Sean went through training together back in 2001. So we'd known each other for a little while. We've been working together for 3.5 months in Afghan. And I remember looking at his face, and he was kind of like grey. All the colour had drained out of his face. His eyes were huge. He was obviously in a state of shock. And it just added to my confusion. I'm like, what was I looking at just now with my legs? And why does he look like this? And so I went to scan back to my legs for some reason. I think just trying to make sense of everything. And I got to like the 3 o'clock position. And then I saw my arm kind of like laying in the sand. And it was still attached to my body. But from my bicep to my wrist, the entire thing had been ripped open. All the bone in the upper part and the lower part of my body had just shattered. My hand was still in relatively good order. And I don't know why, but I just picked it up, held it in front of my face, moved it around a little bit, and then just dropped it in the sand and let out this massive scream as I think the reality and the severity of the situation hit me. And then I understood in that moment that we weren't under attack. I understood in that moment that I was the guy that had stood on and detonated the IED. Now, the thing that I thought of initially, and again, it's bizarre because it's not like what you'd think. It's not like you'd panic, think you're going to die, or any of that stuff. There's obviously that extreme possibility, but I can't explain the confidence that I had in those lads that they were going to get me out and that I was going to be all right. But this situation I was in was probably the worst you could think of if you were to write down the worst situation to evacuate a casualty from, because we're on high ground. I've read the report that was written when the area was cleared. I'm now in a 12-foot by 15-foot crater. I've got 3 limbs blown off and I'm bleeding out profusely. There are 6 other improvised explosive devices around me that have been uncovered when this one went off. And we were trained, the rest of the section, not to run in and help me because of the risk that they pose to setting off other devices. So it's a bizarre situation to be in when you're like, these are injuries horrendous. The lads aren't going to run in and help me. It's extremely dangerous. Even if they do get in and help me, I'm in a 12-foot crater on high ground, which is extremely difficult to evacuate me from. I'm not really sure what's going to happen here. But for some reason, I just never genuinely never felt like I wasn't going to make it out of there. You know, the lads kicked in, you know, the way they responded was unreal. Like, no one panicked, no one froze, no one broke protocol. Everyone just kicked straight in to what they were trained and assigned to do. So one guy straight on the radio calling in a 9-liner to get a Kazivac in. One guy's on his belly, prodding the ground with a bayonet, marking a safe route for when the medic gets to me. One guy's just constantly talking to me to keep me conscious and awake. Another guy's coordinating all around defense in case there's a small arms follow up. And they're just doing all these things like a well-oiled machine. And because of that, the medic got to me very, very quickly. He put tourniquets on my legs, got me to put the tourniquet on my arm, scooped up my arm and part of my right leg, put it on my stomach, got me on a stretcher, got me out of this crater, took me down onto the low ground, put me in the back of a vehicle. The vehicle then, you know, drove as fast as it possibly could back in the camp. And the last thing I remember is the Chinook helicopter coming into land, the huge sandstorm it creates from the propeller blades, and then the heat of the exhaust beating down on me in the back of this vehicle. And then that was the moment that I blacked out, and found out later, many years later, that the medics had declared me clinically dead.
Yeah. There's so much we could talk for hours probably about it. I think the two things from that for me is the moment the incident happens, you're still thinking about the team.
Right.
And I think that translates to how you're then realise it's you that's the casualty. And then you realise, well, I'm okay. I'm with these amazing guys and their training absolutely kicks in. And I think that's where, the British forces, their training second to none, because when it all goes wrong, that's when we do our best, if you like, and it comes alive, and that's the trust which potentially people who haven't served probably may never experience that trust in that team.
Yeah, it's pretty unique, and these are the most extreme of circumstances that you can be put to the test in.
Absolutely, that one is the one you practice for, but never want to ever.
Exactly. Yeah, but when you need to pull it out of the bag and save a life, that's exactly what they did, and and hundreds of others did the same.
Mm.
Mm.
So you were pronounced dead, as you said at one point.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything from that moment, or did that moment or finding out about that shape your perspective on recovery? How did that shape it at all? Finding that out.
Not my recovery. Well, maybe it did. I don't know.
Or you did it help? I mean, you're clearly a very motivated and disciplined person to get where you are now, which we'll touch on. But did that help you in your recovery? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, the motivation and discipline did. The training did. My mindset did. And when you sit there and think about it, and you reflect, and not in a negative way, and you think, I stood on an anti-personnel mine, which had the warhead of a 107mm Chinese rocket on top. Now, you know that, anti-personnel mine is designed to just maim you so that the enemy will come over the brow of a hill of AKs and take out the entire section. But a Chinese rocket will take the side of a building off. And so you sit there and sometimes you think, like, how did I even survive that? And then you think about how grateful you are for the professionalism and the courage of those men that did their job the way they were trained to. And then you think of all the medics and the doctors that, did their jobs and brought me back from the dead effectively. And then the surgeons that operated on me and preserved as much of my limbs as possible to try and make my life as easy as possible for the future. And all the literally thousands of people from every single micro decision to macro decision that was made from point of explosion to get into rehab all contributed to me being alive. And so then you can't really sit there, when you're in rehab and you got sore spots or you're tired or your back hurts and go, oh, I ain't doing it. This is shit. And there were a couple of days of that. But then when you sit there and think, all of these people, situations, circumstances, everything that added up to me being alive, you got to be a little bit grateful for that. And I get asked this a lot, actually. I'm sure we'll talk about bits of this in a minute, but like the way I live my life now and the things I do, a lot of it is my own way of trying to show my respect and appreciation and love for all those people. I probably will never be able to thank them all individually, but what I want to do is live in a way where they see the things I'm doing and the message I'm trying to spread and the way I am. And in their own little way, sit there and go, I'm glad I played a part in that. Because the alternative is, and I'm not being, it's going to sound like I'm being judgmental, I'm not, because not everyone handles things the same way. But if I just decided to become an alcoholic or a drug user or to spend my life in my wheelchair and not use these prosthetics I'm lucky enough to have, in my mind, and again, this is just me, it's just a giant slap in the face to people that risked their life to save me and went above and beyond, not just to save me, to rehabilitate me and everything, all the people that mentored me, supported me, encouraged me, and I'll be honest, it was absolutely brutal, the rehab, because I was the UK's first triple amputee. There was no path for me. I had to figure it out myself, which made everything 10 times harder. But I always just thought to myself, I owe it to all these people to live my life the best way that I can, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So yeah, that's my constant source of motivation.
Yeah, no, I love that attitude. It's like, I know we all band around the world inspirational at the minute, and we over exaggerate words, but you just can't even start to put you in the same category as people that are called inspirations, because I think if one person's listening, many, as we just talked about, many veterans have taken their lives and they struggle. But if you listen to your story and how, you've turned that situation, which as we've discussed couldn't be any worse, and taken all the positives from it. If people can just take one thing from your story, is to try and start, looking at positives and, this shit happened, but look at all the people that helped me, or all the people that are there for people struggling. The veteran community is a very unique community, isn't it? And every veteran will have someone, if they're struggling, they can potentially reach out to. So I guess mental health is a massive issue for a lot of veterans, a lot of civilians, and it's finding that way out of that rut, isn't it? And I think listening to people like yourself and as you say, everybody's got different issues and stuff, so it's just finding that way, like you've done, to dig yourself out of that hole, if you like.
Yeah, and a big part of it, I think, and it certainly wasn't like this in the beginning, it's taken me a lot of personal development and working on myself to get here, but you just gotta focus on gratitude a little bit more. And you might, some people listening might go, what have you got to be grateful for? You lost both your legs, you lost your dominant arm, but I went through rehab with a lot of people who, when you look at them, they may have, I say just lost a leg, but they may have lost one leg. And to look at, you think that their life might be easier. But what you don't know is that they had shrapnel tear through their guts. And I had 3 operations. I spent 6 weeks in hospital where I only had 3 operations. And that was just to clean all the shit out of my wounds so I didn't get infections. I got friends who are on 60 plus operations. Their entire life pretty much revolves around their injuries, but mine doesn't really. I've built a life around them, but it doesn't revolve. I'm not in and out of hospital every 5 minutes. I'm not constantly getting infections. I'm not, fortunately, to my knowledge, didn't suffer any traumatic brain injuries or anything like that. I still fully, operate cognitively and all this lot. So there's a lot for me to be grateful for, but you've almost got to train yourself to see that stuff. And I think it's harder now than ever. We're quite lucky, I think, in the generation we grew up in, because now you've got all these people on social media just living false lifestyles, acting like they've got everything together, pushing this bullshit narrative of, oh, you need a Lamborghini and a private jet to be happy. No, you don't. You know what I mean? If you can get out of bed in the morning, I would love, right? And this is, I think, like a perfect case in point, because I detest running. I never liked it. I didn't like it when I had legs. I don't like it now I haven't got legs. But I would love to be able to get up in the morning, right, in 30 seconds, lace up a pair of shoes and go for a little jog. I was just out in Spain with my family, and just the admin of me going to the gym is a pain. It takes me like 20, 30 minutes to get ready. But the gratitude I'd have if I could just wake up in the morning now with a set of legs, strap on some, high-tech silver shadows and go for a 20-minute run would be unreal. But, if people focus more on that, then, oh, I haven't got the latest BMW. Oh, I haven't got Gucci flip-flops, or whatever it is people think, means that you're successful nowadays. People would be a lot happier, but they want instant gratification. The ultimate goal of my life is to be the ultimate version of myself, and it's not ever achievable. All you do is just level up each time, and that's what makes it so exciting, and why I keep striving forward, because I can't ever achieve that goal. And it's got me constantly striving for it, whether it's as an amputee, as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, whatever it is. I'm constantly trying to level up in those areas to be better. And that's where the juice comes from in life, I think. Not from having, and I've had, back in the beginning, I've had fancy cars and stuff. I used to have an Audi R8, I've had Range Rovers, Nissan GTR, all this kind of stuff. And as corny as it sounds, like money doesn't bring that happiness, as the saying goes. I found that a lot of that stuff quite stressful. Like, having all these fancy things is stressful, because it costs you money and it costs you time, and it takes you away from doing all the other things, like being able to go and sit on a beach, with your family for an evening and just chill is where the juice is. Do you know what I mean? All that other shit's meaningless.
Yeah, definitely. I think the more you have, as you're saying, the less happier you can be. Sometimes just spending that moment with people is definitely key. And I think you're absolutely right with social media and everything, the pressures on younger generations now. I can't even comprehend not having the internet. It's totally alien to them, isn't it?
Mm.
Really. But
All
you've,
that,
yeah,
I was just going to say, all that being said, this next phase of my life now is all focused around business, entrepreneurship, and making a shit ton of money. But not for the reason that you think, right?
yeah.
It's nice to have nice things, but this feels like an area of my life that I don't know and I haven't mastered, and I want the challenge of it, because I'm not a business. I joined the military when I was 17 years old. I'm not a businessman. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not particularly smart. Like I said, I got 10 GCSEs. But what I want to do, and I say this all the time when I go out and speak, is I want to stand on a stage at some point in the next couple of years and say, I've got 4 fingers, 1 thumb, and a smartphone, and now I've made all this money. Do you know what I mean? Just so I can say that I conquered that challenge.
Yeah. So that's because you've accomplished a lot, haven't you? As you say, you've been in, you've you've competed in athletics. What I can't remember. Why can't I
Olympics
remember?
Games.
That's it.
Yeah.
Why did that go off my head? Your motivational speaking, which is going to be changing people's lives, and now I know that exactly what project you're on, because I'm honoured to be involved in it as well, and that you're going to smash up the business world and hopefully change people's lives along the way for the better while achieving your next goal of being a multi-billionaire.
That's it. Multi-billionaire. I like that.
Yeah, don't go for million, go for billion.
Then you think of all the good that you can do with that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you've got your charity that you've set up as well, haven't you?
Well, I didn't set it up. I'm a trustee of it. It's called Reorg, and that is we work in the Southern military, the veteran community, and the emergency services community, using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a vehicle to rehabilitate men and women with physical and psychological wounds as a result of their service. So, it's an honor to be involved in that, and help push that forward, and help as many men and women as I can.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably going to have to get you back on, I think, because
talk about the future.
Yeah, we've got loads to unwrap and unpick, and yeah, it's just incredible.
Yeah,
really, and the resilience. I think I've got a few more questions that maybe we could touch on just before, because I know you've got an important interview. Off to. Yeah. So, what would you say to yourself when you first woke up in bed? You can visit yourself in that bedroom when you woke up in the hospital. What would you say to yourself?
I would say, this is going to fucking suck, but you're capable of achieving it. Like, this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, but you can overcome it, and I kind of, it almost felt a little bit like that was what the voice in my head was saying anyway.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
because in the beginning you absolutely don't.
You didn't need that visit from the past, from the future, to motivate you.
No, not especially, but it kind of felt like it was in the background.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'll probably tell myself that, and in fact, that's what I would tell to anybody that's going through any sort of adversity or difficulty. Like, it feels horrible, like, and the emotions you go through, how you think it's unfair and it's bullshit, and the why me type stuff. But then I think we all underestimate what we're capable of, and I went out and got mentors, and that helped accelerate the process massively for me, which is why I now try and pay that forward in what I'm doing. But I would just like everyone to have a little bit more confidence and belief in themselves about what they can achieve and what they can overcome, because human beings are unbelievably resilient and adaptable. I think we just forgot it a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the one about your role models and your superheroes, and you definitely need that through life, even if you don't realize at the time that they're going to be a role model to you. So, who would you think is the biggest role model that has shaped your life, and potentially you might say Rambo, but have you got one? I know it takes, as they say, a village to build a man, but have you got one defining person that you think was the biggest role model?
No, not one. It's like I take a little piece from lots of them, and and I still do. And when I say mentor, some of them I've actually met physically and they're in my life, but some of them, it's just like the books I've read, or the seminars that I've been on, or the documentaries that I've seen, or whatever, or someone I've seen on social media that I've never even interacted with. They can be role models, right? Because you just look at their mindset and the way they approach things and the things that they achieve and the messages that they spread. And I just take a little bit from everybody, and then create myself out of it.
I think that's probably how you do build yourself, isn't it, over life, and you might not realize that till you get a bit older, that take 100%. Inspiration from everywhere. So what is the book that changed your life?
The book that changed my life?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of them, but when I was going through rehab, I read a book by Tony Robbins called Awaken, the Giant Within. And Tony's like the world's most famous coach, if you like. And he basically was semi-responsible for creating the coaching industry. And he does a lot of it through neurolinguistic programming, which I've studied myself. But until I read that book, I thought that I was the only person that thought that way, the way that he articulates in the book. And so I remember getting really excited reading it. And I'm like, damn, there's other people in the world that are messed up like me that think this way, that you can achieve anything and do anything. And then he gave you some of the tools and the strategies of how to do it. And I was just like hooked on that. And then, again, if we do this again, I can go down the rabbit hole of how I dived into personal development, went on all these courses. I've done all his courses, all his seminars. I've hardly paid for any of them because of this weird sequence of events where philanthropists were just funding it for me. And we can talk about that another time. But it opens your mind and your eyes and increases your network and the people you're around, and then you meet other people, do other things, and you just get out there rather than I think if I'd gone through this, I would have been very insular and just surrounded by the military people in this little city of Plymouth, not really pushed outside much further than that. Whereas now, I'm around the world doing all sorts of things with all sorts of cool people, and it's awesome.
Yeah, it's an incredibly inspiring story, yours, without a shadow of a doubt. But what's one thing before we go that we haven't talked about that we should have?
That's a good question. I was going to say, like mindset, because when I talk to people, I get really intrigued into digging into their mindset. And the great thing about it is it's a trainable thing. You get a lot of people, go back to what we were saying about social media or celebrities maybe. I think people look at them and they put them on a pedestal and they think that they're extremely lucky and the things they've achieved aren't achievable by, quote unquote, regular people. But when you read these people's books and you understand their stories, and I could talk forever about like Arnie and Stallone and all their backstories before they were ever famous. And you read their autobiographies, their mindsets back then, or even now, it is what built them up and got them. They just had an unshakable belief in themselves, even when they're on the bones of their asses, that they were going to achieve what the vision they had in their mind. And I just wish more people thought like that as well, and didn't just quit at the first hurdle or get discouraged by the morale vampires who tell them that they can't achieve the things they want to achieve, and just go on and do incredible things. And the corny cliche I'll finish with is you only get one life. Some of us are lucky enough to have two, but you only get one life, and you just got to squeeze the shit out of it and just do everything you can and do what you want to do and carve your own path. And come in full circle, like we talked about earlier, we didn't really have the internet when we were growing up, and there are good bits to that and there are bad bits to that. But some of the good bits about growing up now, and I was having this conversation with my son last night, is that the opportunities are there more, and you see it with these people making more money than the CEO of a multi-billion-pound company for making YouTube videos. You can do whatever you want in your life now, as long as you understand and believe that you can. You work your ass off. You don't get discouraged by people telling you can't do this, can't do that. You don't quit the first time you fail. You just keep pushing. You can build this ridiculous life where you're effectively living the dream. You just got to pursue it.
Yeah, no, I love that. You definitely, that's how I try. I think we all, well, maybe we don't all, try to live my life every day is by living it to the max. And I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, those people you've mentioned were all inspirations. As you said, they've come from nothing. They've just pushed and had an unwavering motivation. And I think you can do all of the gratitude boards and all that, but you have to put it into action as well, don't you? You can't just manifest it and sit there and wait for it to happen. You have to
and this is the biggest thing, is that a lot of people do all the goal setting and the planning and everything like this, but then they just don't pull the trigger. And from my experience, I think the reason they do that is some is from fear of failure, some is from fear of success, and some is just from that lack of belief in themselves. They get all excited. New Year's Eve, New Year's is the perfect example, and everyone goes banzai crazy setting these goals, and 90% of them don't achieve them. You just got to take action. And what I've found is small, consistent action applied with consistency over time is where the magic is. Not these massive, I'm going to lose 6 stone in 2 weeks and be the healthiest I've ever been. Just lose £1 a month, whatever it is, and just enjoy the lifestyle and the journey, and then, get to where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. You've got to chip at life to get to the top, haven't you? Really, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where can we find you online?
Everywhere.
I know you are everywhere, to be fair.
Everywhere, every day, every social media platform.
And it's just under your brand, which is your name, and obviously
at Mark Ormrod.
Yeah.
On all the platforms. markormrod.com, the website, and then anywhere really. I'm pretty easy to get hold of.
You are, which is better than me. So the last question is, so beyond my podcast is called Beyond the Barracks. So what does Beyond the Barracks mean to you? Your closing thoughts.
I think it's what you said at the beginning. And the second part of that quote was where the story starts. Yeah, and that's what it is. Like these are all just chapters of our lives, right? And I think while we should celebrate each chapter and be proud of each chapter, we can't live in that chapter forever. So when you leave the military and you go beyond the barracks, you've got to reinvent yourself, and you can't live in the past. Be proud of it, absolutely. Utilize everything you've learned, all the networks that you built. But when you go into the civilian world, the quote unquote real world, when you've got to actually work for a living, you just got to attack it with that same kind of discipline and that mindset that you did while you were serving, and then you'll be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on and gracing me with your presence. It's been an absolute, an amazing hour. I love chatting to you anyway. We chat a lot. Thanks a lot, Mark, for coming on.
My pleasure.
Brilliant. Well, we'll see you soon.
Take care.